Stephen Burke. Proper.
Oh, looks like YouTube is maybe cooperating a little bit more easily than at lunchtime today. Yay, there we go. Let's go back there. It's slideshow. Hopefully everyone on Zoom can hear me just fine. Good to see you folks.
Like that.
You can sit wherever you like. Mix things up a little.
Hard to see the TV.
You talk to me, Robert?
I'm doing well. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Good, good. All right. Well, my watch says 7 o'clock. My phone says 7 o'clock. My laptop says 7 o'clock. And let me hide that bar. There we go. That's a little easier. And your pages. Come on. Need to get that mouse keyed in. And your pages in the Siddur should say page 39A if you are using the Lev Shalem, which of course everybody in the room is. And if you are at home, you will find that what we are about to do will be mirrored in just about any standard Ashkenazic Siddur that you can find from Reform-ish, conservative and Orthodox movements. So there's obviously some differences from some of the different elements, and we're going to talk about them a little bit, very briefly as we go through, but that will get us underway. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the door shut because I don't believe in air conditioning in the courtyard. And people know that they are welcome even when the door is closed, as long as it's unlocked. So we left off at the end of our last session with the very end of Kabbalat Shabbat. Video if you want to review. We left off with Psalm 93, and customarily there is a break at that point in the service as we move from the preliminary to the official service. Often in between there is study the traditional texts, the modern texts chosen from Jewish tradition, and I like to just do my sermon there. And then TI and many other places will finish that up with a mourner's Kaddish, which, if you want to know more about that, review what we did in Musaf. Trying not to repeat myself more than necessary. After that, we get to the heart of the service, a section that's known as Shema and her blessings. Spoiler alert, Shema plays a big part of this portion of the service. It is sort of the anchor. Classically, in much of Hebrew poetry and writing, the main idea is in the middle, and then everything else is supported around it, sort of a tentpole idea. There's even fancy poetic versions known as stick versions where the poetry goes in and then hits the main idea and then it's mirrored going out the other way. It's beautiful, it's elegant, it's absolutely mind-boggling to people who grew up with, you always put your title, your thesis sentence in the first sentence, and then you explain what each paragraph will do, and then you do the paragraph. And that's not how biblical poetry works, and that's not how Siddur poetry works. So you always build up, and then you come down, which in my opinion is much healthier. But for essays and academic research, of course, the more Western style is excellent. It's just, there's not a one-size-fits-all. Yes?
Right, just like actually, the Siddur says the Shema and its blessing instead of her blessing.
Yes.
Is that an attempt by the conservative movement to make it gender neutral?
That is an attempt by the conservative movement to point out that in the Hebrew, there is really no intentionality about gender when we talk about the Shema. We don't think of Shema running around in a dress and with long flowing hair and wearing makeup and high heels. And unfortunately, those are many of the heavily gendered ideas in modern America that go with the word her. However, biblically, when you called the Shema a female noun, we didn't think of Shema as like having a uterus. So it's silly for us to be slavishly translating the word her from Hebrew, he, into modern English her, which doesn't have the same meaning. They're not equivalent despite being literally the same. So it is a much more appropriate English word. Hebrew doesn't have it as a pronoun, and so we are left with having to make adaptations.
But does that lose anything from the prayers?
Absolutely not. There is nothing uniquely feminine about the Shema or about the word blessing or any element of that. When Hebrew was being created out of all of the Proto-Sinaitic Semitic traditions and all of that, they didn't have a giant committee that sat down and said, what gender should we make blessings? Because is it more of a girl noun or is it more of a boy? No one thought like that. It was just thrown together seemingly at random in a way that created a very organic and more logical language than English. But nonetheless, we are bound by English, and so we have to try and shoehorn the logic of Hebrew into the illogic of English. And this is just one example, and one that really shouldn't be a big issue, and would not be a big issue if people had not suddenly become desperately insecure about their gender identities in the 20th and 21st century. 500 years ago, people knew that tables and chairs and the sun and blessings didn't have genders. Now everything becomes loaded because people have decided to follow that. So let's move on and talk about things that are much more important than the pronoun that we use for a inanimate, not even physical object. Arvit, Mariv, two different ways to talk about the evening service. Both of them roughly equivalent, both of them roughly coming from the root word Erev. Erev is the word that we usually use in Hebrew for evening. However, language does have its own nuances. Erev comes from the word for mixing, to mix something up, not mix it up like confusion, but mix like you were mixing a batter at home. And that is what evening is. It is the mix between day and night. It is when you see the flow of darkness into the world around you, the shadows lengthen, the sky gradually darkens, and we see a whole mixture of colors in the sky. It is a, in my opinion, beautiful way of describing that special time of evening. Nowadays, yes, we spend a lot of that time indoors, and so we miss this beautiful mixing, this transformation of the world around us that happens. All the more so, most of us miss dawn because even fewer of us are out and about when dawn happens that evening. But for both, many of us miss it, and even if we are out, we're stuck in traffic or running errands, and we're not paying attention to that changing palette of life that is around us. The evening service reminds us of this, as we're going to see very, very distinctly. And what we'll find here is that the Shema and her blessings, the Shema and its blessings, is the same between the morning service and the evening service in theme. There are the same pattern of blessings and the same general theme of each blessing. However, the specific wording and emphasis of the blessing will change between morning and night. So we're starting off with night. Because Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Boker, it was evening, it was morning, as the book of Genesis says. Evening comes first, as it does in the Jewish holidays and day changes. That's why we have Erev for a holiday, rather than starting our holiday at midnight, like American holidays do. So we are going to start off with the evening. But when we eventually, I have no idea when in our calendar we'll get there, talk about Shacharit, the morning service, you will find all of these themes very, very familiar. And you'll see how it all fits together. The pattern is, there is a call, there is a prayer about creation, there is a prayer about revelation, there is the Shema and its paragraphs, which is different than its blessings, and then there is a prayer about redemption. In the evening, we're going to get a bonus one at the very end, but it really is a element of redemption in many ways. You'll know it by the nickname Hashtivain. But we're not going to get there tonight, I'm almost certain. And after we have done that Shema and its blessings, then we follow it up with the Amidah. In the evening service, that Amidah is done privately, meaning that there is no formal group recitation or repetition by the service leader. That is because, as we talked about when we talked about Musaf, the services for the Amidah are keyed into the sacrificial services of 2,000 plus years ago. And the evening service was not a public spectacle. The evening service was essentially the shutting down of the altar for the night. And so that was not something that was done as publicly. It was not something that was felt to be communally mandated. And thus, this has less of a mandatory element to it. And so we do it privately. And a reminder, the Amida is the section where we do, so probably familiar with most in the melody, that whole section of the prayer, like I said, we do privately. So we are going to see that in particular for this, we're going to mark the morning and night specifically as times of reflection. In addition to the Mincha service, which is way down the line for our time, for our review, we will do a special way of focusing ourselves during these moments of prayer each day. But of course, Shabbat gets special flourishes. So let's talk about that call to worship. Most of you have probably seen videos or maybe even have the pleasure of living in a place with a large Muslim population, and you've heard people make the call from minarets. Well, the Barhu is like that as well, although there's the oddity that that call for worship in our service, you're expected to already be there when that call happens, because the call is a call and response. It is not a monologue. It is a dialogue, meaning that the service leader is making a proclamation, actually making a demand, and then the congregation is responding to that demand. This is what we call the Baruch. Now, it seems odd because in Judaism, prayer is officially, as we've said repeatedly, a personal, individual, private. However, in Judaism as well, we believe that public gatherings enhance the spirituality of each individual and increase the presence of God's glory in the world. It becomes better acknowledged and has a deeper impact on the world. So we blend. We have our own personal prayers, but we do it in a group. And the Baruch Hu is a great example of it. It starts off, the next page, it starts off with this call, and then that gets everybody to respond, and then we can continue privately while still being publicly in the same place and hearing the occasional words of the leader. It's this very interesting balancing act that Judaism does, one that drove the early reformers of Germany absolutely insane, which is why they restructured the entire synagogue to be everybody facing towards the rabbi and cantor, and everybody was meant to be sitting quietly in peace and decorum, following only in perfect synchronization. Very German at the time with the service, because other Jewish services were considered too chaotic. Personally, I think we need a little more chaos, but we don't need to go completely off the deep end. So we get reminded, together we are stronger, and together God is felt more strongly in this world. So what does the Baruch Hu actually look like? Technically, the Baruch Hu consists of two lines. It consists of the call, and then it consists of the response. So let's look at the text for each. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Here we can see that the root word of Bet Resh Chaf is doing a lot of heavy lifting, 50% of the words, and that's the root for blessing. So Baruch Hu is in what we call the tzivui form. It is in the command form. If you're good with grammar, it is the imperative form. This is when your mom tells you, clean up your room, right? It is giving you an order, little exclamation point at the end of the sentence if you're typing it out. It's telling you what you are meant to do. In Hebrew, that actually gets its own special conjugation pattern. In English, we just strip the word down to its basic form. Stop, go, eat. Those are all commands in English, but Hebrew makes it a little bit fancier, which is why it's easy to get confused between the word Baruch Hu, the command, and Baruch, the adjective, because they come from the same root. Bless Adonai, who is the one that is blessed, who is blessed, and then our response, Baruch Adonai, right? Adonai is indeed blessed, and Adonai the blessed is indeed blessed, Leolam Va'ed, forever and ever. And yes, the grammar is different than English. That's why we're sort of bouncing back and forth to make a real English sentence out of it. So the leader has called out to the community saying, I want everybody here to bless God. And yes, you're going to have lots of time for your own personal reflections and extemporaneous prayer and improvisation. But for right now, can we start with a blessing of God? And the formula for that is, yes, indeed, Adonai, who is blessed, is indeed blessed. And that blessing is an eternal, right? God is not going to run out of God's blessings. It's in English. Make sense? Okay, so why do I have 3 lines up here? Well, because the leader made that proclamation, the congregation responded. Guess who hasn't actually blessed God in the room? The leader. Therefore, the leader has to repeat that formula of blessing before we've got 100% compliance in the room. So it goes leader, congregation, leader. Everybody with me on the order there? And of course, we also throw in a little choreography. These are blessings that are done with a bow. Like we talked about when we went over the Amidah Musa, the classic Ashkenazic bow, different ones and different times, begins with the knees being bent, then the knees straighten as you bend at the waist, and then the person comes up. You can't do that. It's perfectly fine to bow just by bending the neck. What matters is more the bending of the spirit, but we have found that bending the body helps us bend the spirit too. You don't believe me? Talk to yoga practitioners. Okay, we don't have to bend that much. So every barhu gets a different melody for different days. Not different days of the week, but different types of service. So there's a weekday melody, there is a Shabbat melody, there's a Shabbat melody for morning, there is a Shabbat melody for evening, there is a Rosh Hashanah melody, say Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuot melody. This way it keys you into some of the feelings of those different services. So for example, for Shabbat evening, when we are keyed into that feeling of peace, of shalom, of menucha, of rest, the melody is very lilting, at least the melody that is now common throughout much of the Ashkenazic world. Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach. Very, very nice and puts us at ease. It's not, bombastic. It is appropriate to the time of day. And of course, if you're the leader, it would be something like this with the bow. Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach. The congregation would respond. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed. It's basically the same melody, just mapped onto the different words. And the leader would respond, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Vaed. And now we have officially begun our service. Baruch is also one of those elements of the service that requires a minyan, requires at least 10 adult Jews. Any questions? Okay, let's move on to the first of the blessings that will accompany Shema as we go on. So now we are on page 39a, or I should say we're still on 39a. Just as a little bit of a footnote, and you can read more in Lev Shalem. Page 39b has a different text for Ma'ariv Aravim, which is taken from, if I remember correctly, the Italian rite. It is an interesting way of doing a unique blessing about creation for Shabbat, but standard Ashkenazic practice has been for a really long time to do the regular Ma'ariv Aravim prayer that you'll see on page 39a, on the bottom half of the page. This is the same text that's used even for a Tuesday or a Wednesday. This is just standard evening blessing, because as much as Shabbat is special, and as much as we will honor Shabbat in other elements of the service, at this point, our mindfulness is just on the glory of creation in total, not just how it's reflected in Shabbat. But as you can see from the text on 39b, different traditions and different communities have emphasized different aspects. Jewish prayer is much more flexible than people think. Okay, so what is the theme of Ma'ariv Aravim? Well, it is explaining, first of all, that darkness is a part of creation, right? Night isn't bad. Night is not the opposite of good. It is the opposite of light, but it is not actually bad. And this is an important concept theologically. Many people in the ancient world would often think of light and dark as being God and some dualistic other God that was in charge of evil, or some satanic influence as, horns and pitchforks. And Judaism was saying right out of the gate, no, everything, day and night, this is all part of God's creation. and that we are being reminded that the cycle of the world, which is very consistent, is a wonder and a blessing. If anybody has seen Three Body Problem or read that book, it's a recent and quite popular science fiction series. I don't know how much I want to give away, of people who are exploring how terrible it would be to live on a planet where the cycle of day and night was not predictable. But I won't give any more spoilers than that because I don't want to get yelled at by the internet. So having a reliable cycle of day and night is in fact an incredible blessing for us. And it is partly how we can understand that there is only one God to thank for the order of creation. Right? The order of creation is not bizarre. It is not, oh, the god of night is fighting against the god of day, and during the winter, the god of night is winning, and during the summer, the god of day is winning. No, it follows the same pattern every year. This is not about a tension between some superstitional beings. This is about the way God crafted the universe so that we could understand it and we could live with it. And therefore, we don't have to fear night, or as we see in the text, winter. All flows according to the rhythm of creation. So let's take a look at the text because it is very beautiful. Let's move that out of the way so that we have all of the text. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. Asher bivoro ma'ariv aravim, by whose word twilight or evening is mixed. There's just no great way to bring this into English. I kept looking through the thesaurus to find words in English that would work because ma'ariv, aravim, as you can see, they both playing off that same root word. And it's just, the poetry doesn't work in English quite so well. Bechochma poteach she'arim, who opens, we mean God here, who opens up the gates with wisdom. The she'arim is the metaphor in the ancient world with the idea that there was a doorway somewhere in the great dome of the sky, the firmament, the rakia, and that door would open, and then the sun would come out and begin its journey across the sky, and then it would go through a gate at the other end, and then debated whether it went back behind the dome or whether it went under the planet. It would make its journey to get ready at the next day. That was what was being discussed in their cosmology. And so it's used for a metaphoric purpose for our prayer. That the cycle of day and night indeed is pretty amazing, and we know who to thank for that, which is God. And God is the one who changes times with understanding. And who alternates the seasons. And who arranges the stars in their constellations according to his will. Oh, and I forgot to arrange that. All right, we're one line off now in the translation. My apologies on my format. Now you may be wondering, why are we suddenly talking about constellations? I mean, I know they're pretty and all, but constellations are the calendar. If you lived in the ancient world and you didn't have a calendar stapled up to your wall or hanging from your refrigerator, if you wanted to know what month you were in, you could look at the cycle of the constellations and look at where the sun is coming up, and you would know what month you were in based off where they intersected in that wheel. That was why the constellations were a big deal. It's why people have their star sign for when they are born, because that is basically your month of when you were born. Not that there's any validity to astrology, but it was a really good calendar for keeping track of things like when are the rains going to come? When should we plant? When should we harvest? Well, you could actually tell that by looking at the constellations, and that's really, really handy if you are living in a pre-industrial society, to be able to look at the sky and know where you are in the calendar and how many more months do we have before we have to harvest. That was stuff you needed to know your life depended on. When will the herds be back? When will the flocks come? All of this was mapped out in the sky for you, which is no surprise in that some people turn to worshiping the sky, but really we should worship the architect of the sky. Borei Yom V'Layla, right? God is the creator of day and night. Golel Or Mipnei Choshech, V'Choshech Mipnei Or. He is the roller of light from darkness and the darkness from light, meaning that each of them sort of rolls the other back. Think of like rolling up a carpet. So the day gets rolled back, and in the process we expose night, and then the night gets rolled back, and in the process we expose day. Again, it's a lovely poetic metaphor. And now we are back in sync between the two lines. Uma'avir yom umevi layla. This is the one who causes the day to cross into night. Umavdil bein yom uvein layla, and who distinguishes between day and night. We don't live in a constant, unchanging gray morass of light. We're not stuck in twilight forever. We make distinctions between them, and both of them are good. Adonai Tzivaot Shemo. Adonai of hosts is his name. Tzivaot. When we mean hosts here, we don't mean hospitality type host. We are talking here about the legions of stars as though they are representing an angelic army. That kind of host, meaning like a large gathering of soldiers. So God is in charge of all of this that you see around you. Just like you would be impressed if the general had 10,000 soldiers, you should be equally impressed that God has many more thousands of the astronomical things around us. Everybody following the logic there? I know in the modern world, how often do we even get to see stars from our own home? Florida this time of year especially, but even when it's a clear night, the light pollution makes it very hard to see this. And as I mentioned before, the rising and setting of the sun for most of us is something we barely notice at the best of times and only consider inconvenience when we do notice it. So this is keying us in at night. That night is a beautiful part of creation and we should appreciate it and the creator of it. El Chai V'Kayam, living and enduring God, Tamidi Lo Chaleinu Le'olam Va'ed. Always he will rule over us forever and ever. That the concept of Yimloch, that God will have sovereignty, that God will be king, that God will reign, is a very important one in Judaism. Not because we just like kings. We're not monarchists. We're not big on kings by themselves. Instead, we see God's rulership as being stability, as providing order and providing good laws, unlike many of the other ancient kings that didn't always provide any of them. And so when we talk about God ruling here, we're talking about perceiving that there is a clockworkness to the natural world around us, and that is a gift to humanity, in addition to our very existence. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravi. Blessed are you, Adonai, mixer of the 12. Okay, now, most of the time in our service, and many others as well, we leave time for private prayer. Sometimes we'll read the English translation, which in Lev Shalem is put together to be a little bit more flowing than my choppy translation here. But oftentimes the leader will want to cue people in that we are moving on to the next section. In the ancient world, even really in the pre-modern world, most people didn't have a copy of a Siddur, and so they needed someone to announce where we are in the service. Couldn't say we're on page 39a, moving to page 40, so they would read either the intro or the outro of different passages. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about Kabbalah Shabbat. And we will use a melody that will, again, key people into the mood of the day. So we usually will begin in our congregation with, let's make sure I got the right section here. There we go. So we are on this page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up. If you're in the Siddur, it's also 5 lines up. Look at that. Uma'avir yom umevi layla, umavdil bein yom uvein layla, Adonai Tzivaot Shemo, El Chai V'Kayam, Tamidim Lo Chaleinu Le'olam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai, Ha'ma'ariv Aravi. And of course, we're going to hear that melody set over and over again through the evening service because it is Nusach. Talked about before, it is that block of melodies, improvisational motifs that help key us into that flavor of the particular service. All right, let's take a look now at page 40. As we continue with our blessings leading up towards Shema, the next blessing we go to is Ahavat Olam. It's Ahava Rabbah if we were in the morning, and Ma'ariv would have been Yotzer Or in the morning, just for those of you that are wondering what the pairs are. So Ahavat Olam, is talking about revelation, but it's also very much talking about love. And the word ahava means love. And this is sort of the dominant theme that we have here. It's an important prelude to the Shema, which of course contains the idea of ve'ahavta, which is about our love for God. So here we are seeing God's love for us, and it is being reflected not in the passage about creation, but in the passage about revelation. Right? God loves us, so God gave us Torah. Remember that the word Torah is not a proper noun until much later in biblical times. The word Torah is a regular noun meaning instruction. It only later became capital I instruction, capital T Torah, left untranslated, as we used it to refer specifically to the Torah, meaning the 5 books that we got from Moses. So when we see the word Torah, it's not just a book, it is about instruction. It is about God giving us insights into life and how we should live that we could not at least 100% deduce on our own. Lots of debates about things like murder we probably could have figured out on our own not to do. Other aspects of life, we are kind of really grateful that God gave us these commandments, because otherwise we'd be stumbling in the dark, like we talked about in the last blessing, and we would not be making the best of our life. Creation would, without direction, would still feel extremely chaotic. Even if the sun is coming up and the sun is going down regular intervals, that doesn't mean we know what to do with our days under the sun without some instruction. So then the words of Torah give meaning to our lives. And that is the underlying emotion that we are saying must have been motivated by what we would call love. Right? God didn't just give us existence, God gave us existence with meaning. And that is a higher act of love, of devotion, than just bringing us into being. Aside, of course, there was a lot of tension in the ancient world of whether the gods cared about us or not. Read any of the Greek myths, you can pretty much figure that they didn't, except as toys. And if you read many of the ancient philosophers, they felt that the God who was so perfect, that created everything, must have nothing to do with this imperfect world. And Judaism said, no, God is perfect, and God loves this imperfect creation because we are perfect in our imperfection, because if we were completely perfect, it wouldn't have been created, it would be stalled. But that's more theology. We can talk about that another time. Check out my YouTube series on what is God, if you like. Putting those commercials in. And so there is no greater love than instruction. As my dean of rabbinic school, Rabbi Artson, would say, probably still says it, but I haven't had a chance to study under him in a few years. The Christians may say God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten son. We say God loved us so much that he gave us the Torah. That is for us the ultimate symbol of love, because, hey, life has an instruction book, and that's pretty handy. So the actual text of Ahavat Olam is going to work off this theme of love and instruction, and it goes as follows. Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael. With eternal love, the house of Israel, Amcha, your nation, Ahavta, you have loved. Again, Hebrew grammar, words come in different orders than you'd find in English. But if we were going to put this in English, we would say, you, speaking to God, have loved the house of Israel, your nation, with eternal love. Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limad. Instruction, or Torah, depending if you want to translate that. And here in the prayer, it's a little ambiguous whether we're talking about capital T Torah or the actual noun, instruction. With Torah and commandment, with edicts and laws, you have taught us. And why are we listing all of this? Not just showing that we had a thesaurus back then, it's because in Judaism, these different categories, types of instruction and law have different feelings and different roles within society. And we're trying to say God wanted us to have all of them. Don't just say God wanted us to have the don't murder stuff, but really didn't care about the, don't wear wool and linen blends. No, all of it, start to finish, the important stuff and the unimportant stuff, all of this is helpful and meaningful and an expression of God's love. Do you have a statement?
Yeah, what's the difference between commandments, edicts, and law?
Yeah, that's a whole nother class. When you look into rabbinic understanding and Jewish tradition of what these things mean, we'll often see that these are subsets. So, for example, Torah, mitzvot, Torah, instruction in general could be moral instruction, mitzvot, specifically the commandments, Hukim umishpatim would be the difference between edicts that don't have an obvious logical component to us, like don't wear mixed wool and linen fabrics, and mishpatim are laws that we can sort of see what the logical underpinning would be. Like if you steal something, these are the punishments. But there are entire courses taught about these different layers of Jewish understanding of commandedness, and we do not have enough time to go into them. But suffice it to say, if you will, we can talk more after, the basic concept that's coming through here is all of these are symbols of God's love. It's not like God loved us and gave us some good stuff, but the other stuff, meh, that was mean. All of this is loving. Therefore, Al Kain Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, B'shochvenu ufumenu nasiach b'chutecha. When we lie down and when we rise up, we will discuss your edicts. Now, B'shochvenu ufumenu. Does that ring any bells when we lie down and when we rise up? Does that have any echoes to anyone? Ashkivenu uses it, absolutely. And both of them are drawing from the same source, which is the Ve'ahavta, which is, in fact, on the very next page. So this is setting us up for the Ve'ahavta. It's already echoing some of those themes, so that when we get to the Ve'ahavta, where God is asking us to love God, we are seeing the reciprocity here. Right? God loved us and did X, Y, and Z. Therefore, we will love God and do X, Y, and Z. So there's a sort of, covenant, a contract between us and God that's being sort of hinted at through the word choice. We will rejoice in the words of your instruction, and in your commandments forever, meaning we will also rejoice in your commandments. For they are our lives, and they are the length of our days, meaning they are how we fill our days, and they are what gives shape to all of our time here on earth. And we will meditate on them, we will think of them and consider and study and learn about them day and night. And never take your love away from us forever. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Blessed are you, Adonai, who is the one that loves his nation. Again, the symbol of that love is the revelation, the commandments, the Torah that God has given. Make sense? There's a very, very popular melody for this. Again, we could do it the same way we just did Ma'ariv Ravim and just do the bottom. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Yisrael. We could do that, but there is a melody that's very nice and lots of people like it, and it goes like this. Ahavat olam et Yisrael, ahavta, orahu mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu lemadeta. Al Kain Adonai Eloheinu, B'shochvenu ufumenu, nasiach b'chutecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, u'v'mitzvotecha, le'olam va'ed. Ki hein Hayenu, Ve'orech Yameinu, Uvahem Negeh Yomam V'Layla. And then we would go back and do the finishing elements. And you can tell that the melody was originally composed to link up with that nusach for the end. That's why it wraps up with Yomam V'Layla, and then we have a break and we can use those other melodies. So again, there is great flexibility in how we do this. One little tidbit of pronunciation. Here in the third line, which is the fourth line in the Siddur, we finish with the word limadta, and that ta is a little tricky, but it is absolutely necessary, because if you try to make the d sound physically, and then you try to make the sound without putting a break between them, it doesn't work because the D and the T sound are made in exactly the same way in your mouth. The tongue goes up to the top behind the teeth. The only difference is whether you engage your vocal cords or not. For T sounds, we don't use our vocal cords, and for D sounds, we do. So we have to actually put a little break between the dalet and the tav, or else we wouldn't hear one or the other of them correctly. So limad tav is the way it has to get pronounced. And that happens anytime you end up with those letters back to back, even if for no other grammar reasons they are separated, we have to put a little inflection there to make sure that it's still intelligible. It's one of those unwritten rules that comes up from time to time. And it's just based off our physiology. So welcome to being humans and having a limited number of sounds we can make with our mouth that other people will be able to distinguish. All right, so now we come to that tent pole that's holding all of this section of the surface together, the Shema. When we say the Shema, most people think of just the Shema, the straight sentence, six words, bada bing, bada boom. The Shema in Jewish thought actually is much more than that. It is that sentence, and that sentence is by every measure the most important part of this section, but it is also an introduction to 3 separate paragraphs. We have the first paragraph, which is the second best known section, the Ve'afta, and then there are 2 more paragraphs that we will look at as well. Now, that first sentence and the ones that go along with it together form this unit called the Shema, which is what we mean when we talk about reciting the Shema in the morning and in the evening. Can't do all of this because you have no time or whatever's going on, or you're still learning, or you don't feel comfortable doing something so long. By all means, do just the sentence, the prayer that you might already know. Great, still getting Shema in twice a day in that short form is absolutely going to be transformative in how you focus yourself at least twice a day. But if you can embrace the rest as an opportunity for reflection and mindfulness, you'll find many benefits from reflecting on those words as well. Because there is this interesting sort of formula that comes through blending all 3 of these sections together, where we have the statement of belief, which is very much what Shema is, and then we have statements of action, but that leads then to a reinforcement of belief, because our actions that are referred to in this pull us back into doing things to help make it easier to believe and feel that connection to God, which of course means more action, which means more belief, and we get a reinforcement cycle going here. And at the end, everything is better when we get that, that engine running, when we have things actually pumping away. And that's going to be very important when we get to the main lesson after the Shema, which is all about redemption. So the Shema is really putting in that engine right in the center here of saying creation, revelation, all very important. It's getting us primed with these ideas and senses of gratitude and wonder. But now we got to get this actually pumping so that it makes things happen. And then we see the results of them in the blessing afterwards. That's why the Shema, in my opinion, is here in the middle of this section rather than at the beginning, not just for biblical poetic style, but because really this is the culmination of what we have done with our discussion of creation, revelation, and it is then the transition to, so where do we go from here? So let's take a look at it. So we have to cut off the bottom there. Okay, quarter of an hour, we should be able to get through this. You'll notice on this particular copy of the text, I chose to leave in a symbol that is common in many prayer books and many other editions, which is that long vertical line. This isn't a official grammar thing, it's not official trope. Instead, this is a recognition by many sages over the centuries. And a lot of people mumble the words together. But a lot of people just sort of run things together. And these were added in some editions and are still found in some books to try and remind us, take your time, make sure you finish one word before you begin the next one, because you need to be mindful of all of it. And these are placed throughout the text on places where we are most likely to make and to elide from one word to the next, to slide them in there. And as such, be not clearly pronouncing them and probably then not clearly thinking about it. So let's go over the words. Probably the first six, everybody in the room knows. Shema, Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. And you'll notice they put breaks where we are most likely to slide from one of the Shema, Yisrael, Shema, Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. Each one of those words is incredibly important. Shema, hear, hearken. Hearken is a great translation. It's Fox's translation, one of my favorite translations of the Torah, because it's an English word that actually does come really close to the word Shema in Hebrew. Shema doesn't just mean like listen, it means do what it is you hear. When you hearken to your parents' instructions, it means you're actually doing what your parents told you to do, in addition to actually just physically hearing. And we have that also in the word hear in English, which is of course part of hearken. But it doesn't come immediately to mind that that's what the word hear means in English. So hearken is trying to capture that double meaning of the word shema. Hear it physically, actually take it to heart such that you will act upon it. And we are Israel, the people who are receiving that order. That's another one of our command forms, just like Baruch right at the beginning. What are we listening to that is going to demand action from us? Well, that Adonai Elohim, that Adonai is our God, and Adonai is one. So Adonai is our God probably sounds redundant in many things. I grew up with the Lord is our God, which always felt like, X equals X. And what are you trying to tell me here? Aren't those two words synonymous? Well, no, not in Hebrew, because Adonai, the full Yud He Vav He, is God's name. Right? That's like saying Frank. And if I say Frank is president, that is a very different statement than if I say the president is president. I'm specifically titling, I'm specifically giving to Frank that title. And the word Eloheinu is potentially a generic word. We use that same word, just like we do in English, for God, to talk about our God and to talk about the gods of other nations. The Egyptian gods, they get that same title. So what we are saying here is that Yud He Vav He, we pronounce as Adonai, that is our God. Not an Egyptian God, not a Babylonian God, not a Canaanite God, but Yud He Vav He, the one that gave us Torah, that is our God. And of course, there's so much to say about the meaning of God's name, Yud He Vav He, encapsulating all of existence and being, but this is not a full theology class. We only do it in footnotes. So, but this is trying to focus us on what it is we call God, that it isn't just enough to say, I believe in God. We have to actually be trying to think of what that God is that we are saying we believe in. And that is encapsulated with that Adonai name. And then, of course, we get a little bit of a hint of what that means as well with the phrase Adonai Echad, which can be variously translated as God is one or God alone, meaning that God is the only one that we worship. But Echad has so many different layers to it of the oneness of God that is bound into God's essence, and like the rest of us, we were just one of many, we come by the dozen. That when we focus on that concept of God's oneness, it helps pull away from the temptation of thinking of God as being one of us who just has a lot more superpowers, and really thinking about what it means that God is one, rather than just a one. Helps greatly with that. Now, you'll notice that afterwards we have a little section that is private. I forgot to tell you what page, Psalm 41, which we usually do in private tones. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va. Blessed is the name of glory. May his kingdom is forever. This is another call and response that used to happen in the ancient world, where certain sections would be stated, and the congregation would respond with Baruch Shem Kavod as a response to hearing God's name. This is still captured in the Avodah service of Yom Kippur. That's the a service where we talk about the ancient sacrifice in biblical times. And if you haven't stayed to see that, then stick around after my sermon and go all the way to the end of the Yom Kippur morning service. It's usually around 1 o'clock or 2, depending upon the day. And you'll see. And that Baruch Shem Kavod figures prominently during that service. And then we get to the Ve'ahavta. Now, normally we do this with the trope, but for the moment, I think we're just going to do the translation because
How come it's Shem instead of Pashto?
So Baruch Shem Kavod, like the name of glory, is or the glorious name, doesn't need the definite article. Hashem as a substitute for Yud He Vav He is actually meant to be God, whereas Shem is actually talking about the name itself, if that makes sense. So this is the classical title that we use, and the ubiquity of Hashem as a name of God is, I can't call it modern, but it comes later than these formulas were being created. So you didn't find Moses calling God Hashem, because that wasn't a standard practice. He would have called God Adonai. He would have actually called God with God's Yud He Vav He name pronounced correctly. It's a perk of being Moses.
Name, the name of the name.
Right. Well, it's a definite article, but it's not needed if it's understood from context. But it has become used in more last 1,000 years as a common phrase.
Like Potter and Steve.
Right. Because it's the definite article. Though. Okay. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get through much of this. We're going to do just the Ve'ahavta in Hebrew and then the translation, and we'll do the other 2 paragraphs just in translation, since for the evening service, at least, we normally don't do them out loud. And the primary focus of this service is to help people with the out loud portions, and if we're not doing it out loud together, you should be doing it the language that you understand best, which I think for most of us in the room is probably English. The Ve'ahavta, or Nope. Nope, both are fine. Right? The Shema itself, there's a debate, generally siding with the idea that the Shema itself should be done in Hebrew. And then if you don't understand what you just said, read the English or language of your choice. But the rest of this, most people generally feel could be done in whichever language is needed. Many people feel such a attachment to the Hebrew, and especially for the Ve'ahavta, which is quite widely known, that there's a strong preference in most conservative synagogues to do that in Hebrew, but there's nothing wrong with doing it in English. Yes. No, but I mean, because the Ve'ahavta, especially for some certain translations, became very familiar in congregations. It's almost like learning the Gettysburg Address in certain generations, that it was, you shall love the Lord your God, and it became very famous, very widely known in that particular translation, or slight variations. Okay, so Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. So you are to love Adonai your God, b'chol levacha, with all of your heart, uv'chol nafshecha. Nefesh is a tricky word. It can be soul, it can be being, it can be your essence, it can be a type of breath. It's a broad word in Hebrew. Uv'chol me'odecha, and with all of your strength, with all of your substance, with all of your ability. There's lots of different ways of translating that word as well, and it probably does mean all of them. It's, like if you were to say, love the Lord your God with all your strength in English, we would probably say, well, that doesn't mean just like how much you can curl. Right? That there's other forms of strength that are probably included in that. And indeed, the Hebrew words have multiple layers to it. And so we've got our command to love, but now we get some actions. And these words, which I command you, asher anochi mitzavcha hayom, which I command you today, Right? You will put them, all levavecha. They should be on your heart. Vashinantam levanech, and you will teach them to your children. V'dibarta bam, and you'll talk about them. Shivtacha v'vetecha, when you are sitting in your house, uvleftacha v'derech, and when you are going along the way, uvshoftecha uvkumecha, when you lie down and when you rise up. There's our language that we just had on the previous page for Ahavat Olam. So this is the first sort of explanation of what love looks like. Right? Love is not just an internal state that you are enjoying privately, like a tiny little, keepsake that you're holding to your chest. Love means you do these things. That these are the actions, and it means teaching, and it means talking about it. We're doing right now, and it means engaging with it. Pretty much constantly. That's why we have the when you're at home and when you're out, when you lie down and when you get up. That this is not just something you do for 10 minutes each day. I mean, each day of intense activity like prayer is very, very helpful, but that is not the beginning and end of our connection to God. It's merely one point of it. And then we get some more ways to tie us together, unintended. Ukshartam leot al lebecha, and you will tie them as a sign upon your hand. Behayu letotafot bein einei, and they will be bands between your eyes, or frontlets between your eyes. The translation, or really far back, phylacteries. Real fun word that is just about as incomprehensible to most English speakers as the word totafot. These are tefillin. The boxes that we have on our arm and wear on our head when we engage in prayer, although not on Shabbat, but only on weekdays. So this is reminding us that we are actually going to have to be demonstrably Jewish. There are things that we do in how we speak, there are things we do in how we act generally, and there are things we will do that are, quote, ritual, organized religion, that will all be part of expressing our connection to God. And then, of course, perhaps most famously from this section, we will write them upon the doorposts of our house and gates. And that word for doorposts is, of course, mezuzot. The mezuzah that we put on the doorposts of our home is actually named doorpost. So if you want to be literal, you're putting a doorpost on your doorpost. But that's how words develop, right? The word mezuzah is now technically the container with the scroll inside that is fulfilling this particular command done on the doorpost for which it is made. So that is the Ve'ahavta. But like I said, there are two more paragraphs, and we're going to do them quickly just in the English because I want to get them done today because they are all part of the package. And that way we won't have to do them next week, and we'll be able to start clean with the follow-up. Okay, so this is the part where we normally go private. Again, you could continue this privately with the trope. If you know the trope, you can continue this just reading the Hebrew, or you can continue this in just the regular English. But let's talk about the translation just so we can touch a little bit on the content. Again, we need a full theology class for all of this, and we don't have that today, but let's see what we can. Now it shall be, if you hearken, Everett Fox tried to show this shamoa tishma'u, this grammatical form that happens in biblical Hebrew that doesn't happen anywhere in English. You don't slap part of an infinitive onto another verb and somehow that intensifies it. So he came up with this idea of sort of doubling the word. I went for the underline to try and draw your attention to. You will hearken to my commands that I command you today. What is that command? To love Adonai your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your being. Again, this is an echo of that previous paragraph. These are from different places in the Torah. I will give rain of your land in its due time, shooting rain and later rain. So most of us here in Florida can't tell the difference between different types of rain, other than I'm getting drenched or it's drizzling, and it could switch between them at any moment. In Israel, the Yoreh and the Malchosh are two different types of rains. They're often called the early rains and the late rains. And they had different characteristics, and they came at the right time. Then they would prepare the soil, get things going, but not too hard, and then they would help everything grow really fast once it had gotten growing when it came later. And you wanted those two different rain types to come at the right place in the season. all the way back to our first blessing of God arranging the seasons. So if we're actually doing what God has asked, and we're loving God and doing the commandments, then the clockwork will work. Right? They will get the right rains at the right time. So if they come wrong, or they don't come at all, then we all starve to death. So this is what's being discussed. And then that means you will gather in your grain and your new wine and your shining oil, and I will give forth herbage in your field for your animals. You will eat and be satisfied. So it sounds good. This is paradise as far as most of human history is concerned. If the weather holds, everything grows, able to enjoy what I have grown, you couldn't make me happier for most of human history. I don't need anything else than that. Now, one of the things that is completely invisible in the English translation is this is written in an entirely different pronoun group than the Ve'ahavta. The Ve'ahavta is you, singular. Right? You will love the Lord your God. This, on the other hand, is talking about all of you, etchem. Etchem is the you all version. That's the closest we get in English is the Southern y'all. That is the group second person formulation. So when we're talking about this here, we're not saying if you are a good person, you're going to get all the good rain. And if you're a bad person, your crops are all going to die. This is talking about us collectively, that we as a group, we're going to do well together or we're going to do bad together. This is not like God is only going to make rain here and no rain there. It was in Florida, not so much in Israel. So we were in this together. And that meant as well, for the mistakes, we were in it together. Take care, lest your heart be seduced, so that you turn and serve other gods and bow to them. The anger of Adonai will flare up against you, so that he shuts up the heavens, and there is no rain, and the earth does not give forth its yield, and you perish quickly from the good land that Adonai is giving you. So that is the blessing and the curse. If you all do right, then things are going to go well. You all do bad, things are going to go bad. Now, it seems very simple, but of course, it is a lot more complicated than that. Because it's not just like God is sitting there adding up, I got, 13 credits from this family and 3 demerits from that guy, and what's the total balance for the whole? It is instead trying to say that our behavior, our connection, which is founded through using the Torah in harmony with creation, will actually have an effect on the world around us, including the bounty that we are able to enjoy. That shouldn't be surprising. Did we think that what we did in the world wouldn't affect the outcome? That I could be as bad as I wanted to be and nothing would be damaged from this? I should hope that we wouldn't think that. And yet people are routinely surprised by this paragraph in the Siddur, thinking, oh my God, there are consequences to my behavior? Well, that doesn't seem right. If anything, God is giving us a great deal of latitude by saying, first of all, it's not just what we do, but it is how we are trying to do. And if we are actually trying to follow the commandments and doing it with our heart, even when we make mistakes, well, we've got room for teshuvah, for repentance, and for fixing our mistakes. God's not saying be perfect. God is just saying you got to try, and you got to keep trying even when you make mistakes. And if we do that collectively, things will be better than we don't. I think that has been pretty well proven historically for the last 3,000 years. When societies of people try well to do what is right and to live right lives, to help each other, we generally do better as societies than when we don't. Far too much archaeological evidence for when we didn't. Okay, onward. Less of the sermon, more of the translation. Upon your right, so the good John that God has given you. You are to place these words upon your heart and upon your knee. You are to tie them as a sign on your hand, so it's familiar. And let them be as bands between your eyes. You are to teach them to your children by speaking of them in your sitting in your house, in your walking on the way, in your lying down, and in your rising up. So we remind ourselves that all of this consequence is based upon choice. God is not randomly throwing lightning bolts. It's not a capricious, whimsical God like some of the gods of idol worshippers. It fits together, and we should expect to get something commensurate with what we did. And then, of course, What did I do there? Okay, right. Sorry. We continue that paragraph, right? I was looking for this paragraph, but I forgot that we were still a few lines short, right? So we continue that with more instructions. You are to write them upon the doorposts of your house and on your gates, in order that your days may be many, along with the days of your children on the land that Adonai swore to your fathers to give them as the days of the heavens over the earth. Right? This is the ultimate payoff, which is to say, doing well leads to better outcomes. And it leads to outcomes that are based upon God's promises to our ancestors, but we can't bank only on them. We still have to do our part in the process. We've inherited the fortune from our ancestors, thanks to their start, but we still have to manage the wealth they gave us if we want to continue to live well. We can't just sit back and squander the heritage that we've inherited. Okay, then we get to the final paragraph, which is technically the earlier portion in the Torah. This is from the book of Numbers, where we get into some more tactile ways of making this clear to us. Adonai said to Moshe, to Moses, speak to the children of Israel and say to them that they are to make for themselves tassels on the corners of their clothes in their generations, and they are to put on the corner tassel a thread of techelet. It shall be a tassel for you, that you may look at it and keep in mind all the commandments of Adonai and observe them. What are we talking about here? The talit, right? The talit, which is the garment. Talit just means cloak, but it is the tassels down there, which, as Judy mentioned, is the tzitzit. That's the word of the day that gets repeated here. And customarily, when we reach that point, we will kiss our tzitzit. Now, in the evening service, we do not customarily wear a talit. But in the morning service, that is much more apparent. That's because we are only supposed to be wearing the talit when we can actually identify that color techelet from the other threads in the talit, which at night, before we have electric light, you would not easily be able to do. So it is a daytime commandment rather than a 24/7 commandment. So tzitzit is the idea here, and that was a way of not just marking ourselves as being Jewish, but as giving ourselves a constant swinging reminder that we were connected to God. It's sort of the same way that if you tie a string around your finger, the old days, that would be reminding you to do something. This was something that just as you were going through the marketplace, as you were out on your farm, if you were sitting in the courtyard around your house, you would still have a constant, at least flicker of reminder off the corners of your garments, no matter which way you were looking, that you were tied to God. And that would help us then fulfill the commandments, not them. You feel pretty bad, I hope, if you were going to murder someone and you're wearing a garment that says that you are trying to follow God's commandments. It's pretty blatant hypocrisy to do that. And hopefully you would stop with the murder rather than stop with the garment. Many people historically have made the wrong choice on that, but this is just one more attempt to help strengthen us in that way. To wear them outside. Now, it's technically not required, but the idea is that it will still provide a more visible reminder to wear them outside the clothes, and even if we wear them when we're not obligated to wear them, which is why they'll wear them in many circumstances where it would not normally be a commandment. There's a whole long discussion about talit, that we are actually only commanded to put tzitzit on a garment we're wearing. We're not actually commanded to wear the garment in the first place. So if you never wore a four-cornered garment, you would never actually be obligated to do this. It's kind of like if you don't own a car, you don't have to worry about complying with emission standards because you don't own a car. And no one says you have to own a car so that you can then follow the law about emissions. It's just saying if you own a car, follow the law about emissions. Well, the talit technically falls into that category, where if you never owned a four-cornered garment, if everything you wore was like modern clothing, technically you never need to wear a talit, which is why most conservative Jews say, yeah, but I still want to wear a talit, so I'm going to deliberately buy a large four-cornered garment so that I have to have tzitzit on it, and then that way I'll get to do the mitzvah when I want to wear it, which just coincidentally is going to be during services. So we set ourselves up to have an obligation so that we can actually feel the power of fulfilling that obligation, but we're not technically required to do it 24/7, which is why we don't actually need to have a talit on all the time. And the Orthodox, of course, agree, which is why they take them off when they go swimming, because you're not obligated to wear it at all times. Okay, let's finish this up, and then I'll let you all go. My comments of the 9, observe them, that you not go seek after your heart, after your eyes, which you go whoring after. You know the language is strong there, but the idea of infidelity is a common metaphor in biblical language, because it would be like, we're married to God, but have you seen the parties the Canaanites throw? I mean, they're wow. And that would seduce people away from God because of the various appetites that we have. And this is trying to remind us that it may look good, it may look like fun, it may even be fun for a moment, but long term, that's not actually where goodness lies. Hedonism is a bit of a trap. There's plenty of pleasure that can be had within the commandments, but which is talked about a little bit today during the Lunch and Learn. But don't just go nuts after what you are attracted to. In order that you keep in mind and observe all my commandments, holy to your God. I am Adonai, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt to be your God, to be a God to you. I am Adonai, your God. So reminding us at the end that the whole reason for the Exodus was not only liberation, but it was so that God could be our God, that we would have this relationship. And that relationship requires things like wearing a wedding ring, wearing tzitzit, wearing tefillin, having a mezuzah on the house, speaking Torah, learning Torah, teaching to our families and each other. That's all part of the bargain. Right? When you get married, you're not getting married just so that you can have more advantageous tax, filing. It comes with a whole host of other aspects that are meant to deepen and strengthen the relationship for the good of yourself. That's why you're there, just for the tax. Make sense? Okay, and as we can see at the end, we get this interesting little Adonai, Elohim, Emet. We take the last 2 words of this, and we're going to tie it to the first word of the next page. That would be at the bottom of page 42, and then blending into 43a. But we're going to do that next week. So we will wrap that up for tonight. Any last-minute questions? All right, if you have new questions next week, we're not here tomorrow, then feel free to bring them and we can continue to discuss. Let's escape there. And thanks to all of our Zoom friends. Hope you have